There you are.
All right, Peter. We have there's about 100 folks here, and I've read your letter to them, and we want to thank you very much for your dedication in fighting this battle. And would you tell us, I didn't do an introduction of you, so tell us just a little bit about yourself, if you would.
About myself?
Yes.
Okay. I started out in life as a lawyer. I was born and brought up and qualified in Scotland. Decided I didn't like it. Went back to university, did an MBA. Cut a long story short, I went to Hong Kong. I ended up spending 19 years in Hong Kong, not as a lawyer, but as a corporate investigator. And I became quite famous in anti-money laundering consulting. I was getting bored of that. And so one day I got an email from the UN saying, you applied for a job, are you still interested? And I said, yes. And I went to work for the UN in New York in the Office of Internal Oversight Services, which is the office which is essentially the UN internal rat squad investigating.
I lost your picture, Peter.
Oh, why did that happen?
There you are. You're back.
Back again. I fell out with the UN, and the rest, as they say, is history. I got involved with the subject of child sex abuse by UN personnel in 2015, which was actually a couple of weeks after I left. And now what I do is I have basically, I've become a sort of campaigner. I do some consulting work for other UN staff members. I talk to politicians, lawyers, and others this subject, and it's sort of become a full-time job for me.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, you were telling me yesterday about your activity in Great Britain, and I know Jack told me that an article appeared in the New York Times recently. So could you kind of flesh in what's been happening recently with regard to the results of your investigations? I'm losing your picture. I think it's broad your bandwidth or something, but.
I don't know, maybe 6 months ago, I got a call from a guy called Andrew McLeod who wanted to sue the UN, and I said, yeah, it won't work. Andrew spoke to me, told me a story, and I said, hold on, I'm going to get on an airplane and come down and see you. Cut a long story short, three of us got together and formed this organization. And we've been chipping away at the UN. About 10 days ago, there was a scandal broke in the British press about the charity Oxfam. That led to Andrew being invited on television. He did something like 20 television interviews in the space of a week. And the entire UK has more or less caught fire on this issue. It's quite interesting. What I failed to appreciate is that most people, the UN is very remote, right? It's not something that there's any personal connection to. But Oxfam is a household word, it's a household name. There are charity shops in every high street. And everybody in the UK has given a couple of pounds to Oxfam over the years. So it actually seized the national attention, and we've had a huge amount of press on the subject of sexual abuse by aid workers.
I see. You were talking to me earlier about your ability to get some of this information into the American press as well as into the British press. And could you tell the folks about how you're able to do this, and also a little bit about how you discovered all of the abuses and how they occurred?
Oh, the press. I'm not a PR strategist. If you ask me that, the honest answer I could give is more by luck than by judgment. But when I worked at the UN, I knew that we weren't doing it properly. The investigations were not thorough, and there was, a lot of political interference. Well, I spent my last 2 years out of the 4 that I worked there trying to defend myself from being accused of being the biggest idiot that ever was. But what I've done since is, for example, a lot of what we do and what I've been doing this afternoon is going through UN official documents, pulling out facts that are trying to lose in the woodwork. I do a lot of that. I've got a couple of newspapers actually working on it. There's various journalists have been phoning me. I've been incredibly busy the last couple of weeks, and it's all basically since the Oxfam thing really kicked it up a notch. There are a couple of other publications working on major stories about the UN, and everybody manages to beat their way to my door on this one. I also have people who will call me, other potential UN whistleblowers, and sometimes anonymous documents just drop through the mail because somebody wants me to see something.
Tell me, could you give a few examples for the folks of the kinds of abuses that you have investigated with regard to the UN operations in various countries, and also what's been happening at some of the UN headquarters? I know the issue in Belgium, for example.
The frustration that all the journalists encounter is that the UN is very, very good at running them round in circles, and basically until they get tired and go away. There is a tame press corps in New York. We're quite happy to reprint the press releases that the UN puts out, attend the cocktail parties, and never actually ask any pressing questions. There are 2 or 3 individuals who actually cover things. And you can, even with information that's in the public domain, the UN basically lurches from one scandal to the next on almost a weekly basis. But if you like on the big ones, when would it be? Would have been about 2015. The FBI arrested 2 UN diplomats charged with corruption and money laundering, John Ash and Francis Lorenzo. Ash actually died under mysterious circumstances. All the others pleaded guilty. They were basically tied up with a Chinese businessman called Ng Lap Seng. Ng Lap you've heard of before. If you remember the Clinton foreign donations scandal about 1996, 97. Donations from shady Chinese businessmen to the Clinton campaign. Same guy. Turned up again bribing UN officials. The way that the UN treated that is particularly interesting because, of course, there was someone on the inside. There was a UN official who was involved in falsifying a document, and probably a lot more. He was coming up for his 62nd birthday. So the UN, the office I work for, in fact, the guy who was my former supervisor, was in charge of the investigation. They opened the investigation, and then they did nothing for 3 or 4 months. They stalled on it because there was an audit going on, and that successfully wasted enough time so that they started something. They did it very slowly, and by the time the investigation was over, the guy had left. His name was Ion Botnaru, right? So it didn't actually matter whether they found him guilty of misconduct or not. He'd already left the organization. And that is typical. The sexual exploitation and abuse cases are the ones which grab headlines. The UN is very good at excusing themselves and saying, oh, but that's not the UN, that is military peacekeepers over whom we have no jurisdiction. And it's not strictly true. And what we have spent the last 2 weeks trying to point out is that even the UN admit there are more sexual abuse cases by civilians working for the UN than there are military personnel. Okay, the problem is bigger amongst the civilian staff than amongst peacekeeping troops. And when you consider that in the large peacekeeping missions, things like in Sudan, they have 25,000 uniformed military personnel on the ground, supported by about 2,000 civilian staff, and you're getting the same number or more complaints against the civilians than the military. There is something seriously wrong. And the question becomes one of the abuse of the immunity. Now, the immunity issue is a fairly big and important one. And we've managed to actually crack that. My colleague Andrew went on television, went on the Halagarani program on CNN, and basically challenged the UN to answer this question as to whether or not immunity applied in the case of sexual abuse of children. And the UN had to respond, and they said, no, it does not. Okay? Well, we actually consider that quite a significant breakthrough, because we've never actually had that in writing before in the 70-odd years that the UN has been up and running. So we've achieved something quite significant. Now, what I would, John is going to speak to you, and I'm very thankful that John was able to step in and replace me. I can't fly at the moment. And John is going to talk to you about the Sovereignty Restoration Act, and basically why it would be beneficial to get out of the UN. And some of you are going to ask, well, why am I mucking around the fringes of that? Why am I not sort of tackling the question head on? Let me tell you, I'm not tickling around the edges of it. For any of you who are students of military strategy, I'm a disciple of Basil Littlehart, and I have read the book, The Indirect Approach. Okay? Why do I care? Why do I care about the sexual abuse of women, all right, and children by UN personnel? All right. Well, I believe it's, number one, it's important that somebody cares. I also believe it's important that the UN is held to account. And the way we hold to account by breaking the use of the immunity. Now, if we start by challenging the immunity on sex crimes, obviously the next step is to challenge the immunity for the accountability for any crimes, especially financial crimes, because I happen to believe that the UN system is riddled with fraud and corruption. Okay? I don't want to get into that. Just trust me, I've had 20-odd years of experience, and again, that is what I suspect. The Sovereignty Restoration Act is, politically, it's a very big ask, right? The fact that the bill actually gathers support in Congress frightens the UN. It is adding pressure to them at a time when they're under pressure like they've never had before, okay? But for various unfortunate reasons, the UN has become the vehicle for international law. And to persuade any member state to get off that bus is politically an enormous challenge. What I could suggest to you, and if I leave you with one message on that, is it's a lot easier to get off the bus and to tell someone else to get off the bus if they understand that the bus is on fire.
Very good. Very good. Excellent.
You get me on that?
Thank you. Thank you. We're gonna probably close with you, Peter, and I just want to thank you for the letter you sent, and and the action steps that were indicated at the end of the letter. We've read those to everyone, and hopefully everyone here that's present will take those individual steps, because we desperately need to be putting the pressure on our Congress to do the right thing. And hopefully, what you're doing is adding some tremendous ammunition to put in the gun of people like Mike Rogers, who introduced that American sovereignty. If he could stand up on the floor of Congress and give the facts that you're uncovering, it would go so far, even to have more people join with him. And you're right, you know, you're chewing off a big piece here, and I particularly want to compliment you on how you're defending people, because these folks that are being abused, they need someone to defend them. And I thank you for doing that.
Thank you. I'm not going anywhere. Call me back.
Well, you get some rest. Kip Webster says hello, and John McManus, and others that are here tonight. So thank you so much.
Right.
Take care.
But as I said,
yeah.
if you want to, or if anyone individually wants to ask me a question, if you can leave the ability to Skype me back.
Okay.
I'm very happy to talk to anyone.
Excellent. Excellent.
All right.
Thank you so much, and we'll see whether we can do that maybe even a little later in the day if you're going to be there.
Not a problem.
Thank you, sir. God bless
you.
Have a good day.
I'm sorry again I can't be with you, okay?
Thank you.
All right.